Do you remember when we met?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We met the night of your show. I was sitting with Tarana Burke.
Yeah.
And I was like just bonding with her, and I was so happy to be sitting with her. And then at the end of the show, I came backstage and I gave you the biggest hug, and I was like, I've known you forever and ever. And it was really wonderful. I mean, I also just really appreciate you because you're just so vocal and so supportive, and you're like about making sure that people know what's going on, and also like what we can do about certain things that are happening in the world, and just how to be of service to our own communities. And so that was something that like I feel like it was just like love at first sight.
I felt like I know you, and I was like, oh my God.
You built community.
Yeah, and when I was like reading about you and all the stuff that you do and everything, I was just like, man, like, I want to be friends with her, you know? Yeah.
I'm so happy that happened.
Talking about like, hijab and like how you present yourself. And so you've talked about it gives you strength and power.
My experience with hijab was a part of my journey in finding myself. I grew up in a very conservative, small white town. There weren't any Muslims around. And so my mom, who started wearing hijab at 23 after I was born. So I was born in West Virginia, lived in Alabama, grew up in Southern Maryland. And I struggled a lot with my identity because I had never seen people who looked like me. And the only person that I could see were the people in my family. And hijab has to be a choice. So my parents never really talked to me about it or mentioned it, but they knew like from this high that I was going to be a journalist or a reporter before I even knew what the term was. I like was obsessed with Oprah, and I loved asking questions and telling where everybody was, right? And that was something that was so innate in me. It was so natural to me, and so they knew that was going to happen. But to me, growing up, I had never seen anybody with a hijab on American television. And so my understanding was that you obviously have to look just like the people on TV to be like the people on TV, because otherwise, why else would there be such a lack of diversity? And as a kid, I internalized that. And so like to the point where like, when I got to high school, I was dyeing my hair blonde and wearing colored contacts because I thought that's how I had to look. And it wasn't until we moved out of that town and we moved right outside of Washington, D.C., where I really tried to come to terms with my identity. And when I realized that like my mom, who mashallah is just like so strong and courageous and brave and unapologetic in who she is, and then my younger sister at the time, who was 12, she decided to put on the hijab. And I was like,
12.
wait, what? Yeah, she put it on at 12. And my parents were like, are you sure you want to be doing that?
Wow.
And I was like, what is it about this thing that makes people so strong? So I put it on kind of impulsively in a place where I was like really struggling. And I realized later that I think that any way of putting on your identity or finding yourself and being your most authentic self, you're never ready for it. You're never like, I've gotten to a point of like a pinnacle of righteousness and piety, and I've done all of these things to get to this point. No, putting on yourself means putting it on in a time where you're broken and you're struggling and you're trying so hard to find yourself, because in that darkness is the light. And so to me, I was like, maybe this is it for me. And I put it on, and nobody in my family like thought I was going to keep it on. And I found this out kind of later. They all thought I was going to take it off. They're all like, yeah, whatever. But when my mom saw that I put it on, she was like, hey, if you still really want to accomplish this dream of being on television, then why don't you homeschool the rest of your high school and start college early? So I started college at 16 so I could get a head start in my career. And I realized that in order for me to be able to do this, I had to be the best journalist possible. I had to be as confident as I possibly could, even if I didn't feel it on the inside. I had to be that person for everybody who came before me and everybody who was coming after me.
What was the reaction from your friends and like families? Obviously, they saw
you.
But
That's such a great question, because I've never like really thought about it out loud, but it was definitely a transition. So when I started putting it on, everybody that I grew up with, that I stayed in touch with, like they fell off. Like I realized that a lot of them didn't come around. They didn't understand it.
Did they ask you?
No, and now as an adult, more of an adult, I realize that people don't ask because they don't know how to ask, or they feel like they're scared to ask out of ignorance, and that we live in that today, which is why, like, I always say, please, please, please ask me every single question. You'll never, if you ask me, you don't offend me.
If you ask with love, you know, if you ask with empathy, love, and interest.
But if you ask with, like, you're going to believe your answer already and you still won't, then that's different. If you choose to live in abundance, and you realize there's so much out there for you, that you don't need everything, you don't need everybody, just find the place for you, then you thrive not only in whatever you choose to do, but like also in the way that you carry yourself and the way that you live your life.
It took me a while to understand, you know, like that your friends from, let's say, childhood or old friends, you know, some of them may not stick around. Were you prepared that you might lose some of your friends?
People just became distant, but they didn't ask me about it. And I was too shy to talk about it. So we just pretended like it wasn't there. If what you know about hijab and Muslim women is what you see in the media, and that's your perception, then I would be terrified of it too. Like, I would not agree with it because of the way that it's presented.
What was the decision for you to go to Fox?
I think it's my responsibility, and just anybody who has a platform's responsibility, to put yourself in spaces that are not comfortable for you or that have not welcomed you before. In 2016, Playboy profiled me as, so 2016 they were doing no nudity, and they had a Renegades issue. It was their first Renegades issue. So they did, I think it was like 6 renegades in different industries. So for journalism, they chose to profile me as a renegade, and they talked about my work, and
that's amazing.
it was an incredible experience, but it turned the world on its head, and people could not stop talking about it because it was the first time there was ever a Muslim woman with a hijab in Playboy. And I had people who were extremely supportive, and then I also had people who were like, how could you do something like this? But to me, I'm like, my message is clear, 110%. I've never wavered from it. It's my truth. Why am I going to continuously only go on platforms that already know what I'm saying and already understand it? Because I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of people reached out to me after that saying, wow, I've never heard this from a Muslim woman before. I've never heard something like this before. And to me, my act of service in my own like way of thinking in life is to be able to put myself in places that are uncomfortable because I know my truth. For me, I got the opportunity to do that, and I mean, I definitely asked mentors and I asked people what they would do. But at the end of the day, like, it ended up as crazy as everything turned out. I'm really proud of being able to put myself in places that haven't welcomed me before.
Hats off to you for doing that.
Thanks.
You know, that's really inspiring. Besides the strength of it, like, what is it that you want the world to, when they see you, when they look at you, when they hear you, what do you want people to walk away and get out of it?
It's such an interesting question, because I was having a conversation with my mom a couple of days ago about the hijab and how obsessed people are with it and how uncomfortable they get with it. And I don't think it's just the hijab. I think we are just obsessed with what women choose to do with their bodies and how they choose to dress. When I was working on Sold in America, one of the sex workers I was talking to told me that she had written an article about how she related more to Muslim women than anyone else because of how obsessed society was with the way that we carried ourselves and dressed. When I was in Paris years ago, I went on their biggest talk show on television, and I talked about, because there's a lot of laws against the hijab in France. And I talked about, like, I don't care if somebody walks out butt naked or completely covered. I don't think that the government should be able to tell women how to dress. And I didn't realize how controversial that was, because it created such a stir there. And that was just my truth. Hijab is so personal that, yes, you can see this, but you will never know exactly why I wear it or exactly why she wears it, because it's probably 2 different reasons. And then you don't know, like, how direct of a connection this is to my faith and my belief in living for something bigger than myself. And I want to be able to walk into rooms, and then when I walk out, forget my name, forget my face, forget what, like, who I am, but don't forget the message. The whole point of this, to me, is a reminder that, like, I wake up every day and I get to say, like, I live for something that's way bigger than myself. And even if, like, on the surface, it makes people uncomfortable or it, like, is misunderstood, that there's still a message that, like, I want to penetrate your heart with. And to me, that's more important than anything. I know that I'm doing this for everybody who fought before me to
Yeah.
make it easier for me today to even be sitting in this chair, and everybody who's going to come after me to make it so that like one day there will be other women on TV wearing a hijab and no one's going to even think twice about
Yeah.
it. I spoke in Reno, Nevada last week, and there was a girl who came up to me. She was wearing a hijab. She drove hours to be there, and she was like in tears. And when I saw her, I was like, wow, like this, I like feel like I'm looking at myself.
Yeah.
I could tell like she'd been
Yeah.
following me, her style, the way she wrapped it, her makeup, everything. And she was like shaking, crying, and she was like, I never thought that this is something that I could do. And I'm literally studying journalism because I saw that you could do it, so that I can too, and then the door is finally open for me. And I don't think about it like that because like I always say like people like Oprah and Lisa Ling and Christiane Amanpour and Soledad O'Brien, all of these women like made it easier for me.
Yeah. Your story deeply resonates with me because growing up, oftentimes, especially when you're interested in fashion and all this, like in style and fabulous stuff, you start to equate your worth with what is being published, or whether it's in magazines or on the cover and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden you turn page and you see no one that looks like you. Subconsciously you start believing that your worth is somewhat not as much as that white person's who's on the cover of a magazine. And so for me personally, when this Crazy Rich Asians happened, I called up all my other designer friends and everyone, all the Asians, and I said, listen, this is the first time we're being represented in a way that we are desired, we're desirable, we have similar wants, and the narrative is similar to like what has always been allocated to a white person.
I cried in Crazy Rich Asians because like, even though I'm not Asian, I was like, oh my God, like this is so revolutionary. Like this kind of representation, I felt it. My friend Rami has a show called Rami on Hulu now, and it's like a representation of a Muslim American Arab experience. And I was in tears when I first watched the show, and I told him, I was like, I didn't know that this is what representation felt like. And you don't know
till you see it.
Because it's missing.
Yeah.
You don't know that that's what you needed.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, is this exposing like my life? Like, is this what representation feels like? And it was like really, it was so surreal. And you realize like when you become that person, especially as a public figure, I always say like, I want to be the person I wish I would have had when I was 12. And my sister is 13, and I've always like my youngest sister, and I always keep my younger siblings in mind because I'm like, I want them to see like what I had missing.
We're in this time now, we are being celebrated,
Right.
Which I feel in so many ways it is the greatest thing that's happened to us, but in so many ways it's also time for us to be a little more vigilant.
We have to understand the power in true inclusion.
Yeah.
Why do you want your decision-making table to all look the same, think the same, and walk
Yeah.
the same? No matter how diverse your campaign is, it reads inauthentic.
Yeah, 100%.
And if you are a part of a minority community, you can see through that. Now that social media is something that is a part of pushing culture forward, people get to choose where they're loyal, who they support, how they spend their dollars, and where they want to stand by. And now it's not enough for a company to just have diversity in a campaign, because if you aren't standing for something, if you aren't firm in the way that you carry yourself, people sniff it out. I mean, we have the power now to garner audiences on our own. You don't need to be in a magazine. You don't need to have certain type like press in your traditional form. You just need to be with the people. And the people know what's real. The culture is moving in one direction, and if you want to continue to maintain a certain legacy, then you need to be on the front lines of that of that push. And if you're not, then you're gonna fall behind.
Talking about magazines, I just wanted to have a conversation about that misidentification and the misrepresentation of you in pages of Vogue. How did you feel? What did that particular moment mean before you realized it wasn't, that you were misidentified?
We got the inquiry the first day I moved to New York. So I was like, oh my gosh, it's meant to be. Like, this is wild. I mean, I've been reading Vogue since I was a child. It was such an honor, and it was something that I really was so excited for. But I know misidentification is more common than not for me. And not just because it's me, just in general. So
me too.
when it happens, when it happens, like I know how to like try to prevent it. So what I was disappointed was that we had reached out a couple of times beforehand to ask to fact check, because I knew that people usually spell my name wrong or do something. We hadn't gotten a response, and so when we went to the airport that day and I found the magazine, Adam, my husband, took a video of it because we were going to send it to my family.
Yeah.
That's like, I was not intending to send that to anybody, and then I opened it and I was so excited, and then I read the caption and I thought that they spelled my last name wrong. But I was like, it's so wrong though. And I started like, I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe this happened. Yeah. But to be completely honest with you, I wasn't surprised. I was just really upset. They called me an actor and a model who was from Pakistan, like, and it was completely different. And it's just like, I wouldn't blame the person who typed it in. I just blame the system that exists in which like we can't invest enough and we don't care as much, especially when it comes to minorities. People weren't upset because it happened directly to me, essentially. It was because everybody saw themselves. They were like, this would happen to me too. This would happen to me too. And they realized that like more often than not, you are there to check off a box. And that is where that conversation of true inclusion comes in. How many times are you actually represented? I also recognize that tokenism and being a box to check off is almost a requirement for you to get to the place where you can have a seat at the table. Which is why the journey, as gutting as it is necessary so that you can be there to open the door for the people who are coming.
You're doing incredible stuff. You're inspiring us. You're, you know, you're out there. You're talking about it. You do need a moment off. You know, you need time off, right? So what or who allows you to be at a place where you're in your center and calm?
I'm really lucky that my husband's family and my family are just a few hours away. So my like recharge, I realized this past weekend because I was with my family, is like spending time with my siblings and my parents. And my family has a foundation called ICU. We work to alleviate homelessness. And this past weekend, we made like over 500 packages for people experiencing homelessness and passed them out. And I think just being there and being a part of that process and spending time with people who have different experiences is like what centers me. And it's funny that you said that, because I used that word this past weekend where I was just like, wow, I feel centered. I needed this. But besides that, I mean, I love taking baths and eating really great food and like just laughing really hard. So like in the darkest times, like when I was filming Sold in America, the only thing I could watch on television was like cartoons. Like Rick and Morty and Bob's Burgers, like, and you just have to figure out a way to unplug, because you can't give from an empty cup.
For me, it's like Bollywood karaoke. It's like my way of like distressing.
I do karaoke, but I've never done Bollywood.
No, well, I have one at home. We must do it, okay? And then the other thing is like the process of getting ready. You know, like for me has been like I take time in the bathroom, like, you know, just like even when I'm like, you know, done for end of the night, you know, like I'm like by myself, even if it's like 5 minutes or half an hour, however long it takes, I really enjoy that time.
I also just don't feel like that deep breath until like I have everything like taken care of. And it is a process. I try, I mean, my skincare routine is so important to me, and I just love
what is it like? Hydration. Tell me, what is that?
Oh my gosh, I think I'm like not as particular as a lot of people. I just try different things. Dr. Barbara Strum like sent me a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, your stuff is amazing. So I like literally do her whole process.
Oh really?
And then I'll like use a roller. I'll put like a mask on or gels.
But I love it. Don't you love it?
Yeah, I light candles. I play music. I take baths. Like, which is like, oh, that's so funny and cute or whatever, but it's intentionality.
Whether your skin looks extra great or not, it doesn't matter to me. It's like the very fact that you've taken time for yourself.
100%.
You know, it is like you're
nurturing yourself. It's a process,
You're nurturing yourself. You're saying, guess what, me first. When you're taking care of yourself, that's the only way you can take care of others.
Exactly. And that's like where the disconnect is. So I always believe like you have to be of service to yourself if you want to be of service to other people. And you have to be able to take care of yourself. And there's like, but it's hard to find that balance. Like I remember, I'm somebody who internalizes a lot. I take in a lot of people's emotions. Like if someone's hurting, I will feel that. Like, and so when filming, like spending 2 years filming something that was like really hard to internalize, I had to find like a way to be okay for myself, because there is like secondary trauma where you're taking in things that even if you didn't experience them, and then there's this guilt where they're like, oh, I didn't even go through that, so why am I feeling bad? Like, you know, you have to find that balance and then figure out what way am I going to be able to be my best self when I show up tomorrow.
Who could be your icon, whether it's beauty, whether it's who are your icons? Who do you look up to?
Well, one person that I think has been doing an exemplary job of leadership is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who,
Oh my God, yes.
like, really came through and brought an entire community together that like couldn't be further from like relating to the situation through humanity, compassion, and like true love and understanding. She like approached the Muslim community after the terrorist attack with like such deep compassion, and when she cried, the entire country cried with her. And I thought that that was one of the most beautiful things. But like my personal icons are like people in history, even in just Islamic history. So like one of the women in Islam is Khadija, who was married to the Prophet, peace be upon him. And she was a businesswoman. She was one of the most successful business people and one of the most educated people. And she was a leader and so much in power. And I take a lot of inspiration from like people that I grew up learning about. And I always think that it's interesting because this notion, especially like this representation of like Muslim women are oppressed, is so like staggering because that's nothing of my experience. And yes, people around the world have different experiences because of culture, but there's also a differentiation between culture and religion. But in my religion, I was taught like you had to be educated, you had to learn how to do things for yourself, you had to know how to drive, you had to know how to defend yourself, you had to know how to speak, and you had to be able to walk into spaces and recognize like what you had to say mattered more than anything else.
And this is in your religion?
This is in my faith, yeah.
Okay, wow.
My faith is literally rooted in service and compassion.
Yeah.
You do for others, and you are kind to people, and that's it.
I want to sit with that because that particular, what you just said, that, you know, in itself is breaking down so many myths that's associated with someone who looks like you, let's say.
Yeah.
You know, and the
Just ask.
Yeah, no, that's the truth. And the biggest lesson like we can take away from is like, don't be afraid to ask.
Look at you. Are you going to be a journalist now?
No. That I'll leave it up to you.